Hello and welcome to Jill Cameron Creations. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss a single video. Today we're going to be doing some Copic coloring on this cute Santa. So I have my camera angle a little bit different so that you can actually see how I'm holding my marker, so you can see the tip of the marker on the paper. This is sped up twice instead of just regular speed, and it's not super fast, but this is going to be about a 20-minute video. It's a little bit over 20 minutes because I wanted you to see the whole entire video being colored, and that's all we're going to do is color this. The whole entire card is at the end, and I kept the card super simple. I cut it out using my Silhouette Cameo and then just layered it on top of a piece of patterned paper and a piece of cardstock and put that on the card, because we're focusing on the Copic coloring. So I did my skin tone first. I usually, when I'm coloring a person, I will usually start with the skin tone, and it might seem like it's a little dark, but remember, as you add color, the lighter it's going to appear. For skin tones, I will usually, for Santa, I start with an E04, and then an E11, E21, and E00. If it's a larger space, I will add an E000 at the end there. Notice I'm not doing a lot of flicks. I'm actually doing a lot more line work here, and I'm doing a super light touch, and I'm going in with a lot of different colors here. I have an RV99 for the red, for my darkest red, and that's in the red violet line. But for a really dark red, this is a super great color. It gives a lot of definition and it doesn't blend out as much as if I were just going to do like an R89. But an R89 is going to be my next darkest color here. And now I'm going to start doing a little bit of flicking away from that dark color. Now I'm not going over and over and over that dark color. I am just adding in more color. I tend to do lines of color and then maybe flick over top of it a couple of times. I don't like to blend out my colors a ton. That's just my personal preference. I like to see a little bit of a delineation between the colors. That's, like I said, that's my personal preference. You can definitely blend a little bit more between your colors. I'm coloring on Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. Keep in mind that the higher the pound, like if I were coloring on 100-pound cardstock, yes, it's a heavier weight cardstock. That also means that the cardstock is going to absorb more ink, and it's going to make it more difficult to blend your colors together. So keep that in mind when you're selecting your cardstock to color. Now I'm moving on to his suit, and I'm selecting the areas that are under stuff for the darkest area. So I'm back on that RV99, and I'm selecting areas that are like under his hand, on his back side here, and under him, his underside, in his little armpit, on the back side of his cuff, and that kind of thing. That's where my darkest areas are going to be for his red. And it's been a while since I've actually sat down and done a whole lot of Copic coloring, so I did this last night and just chilled and listened to some music and just really enjoyed this. Now the bottom side of his coat is going to be a little bit darker, so I went ahead and just colored that completely in with my R89 color. The other R colors that I'm using are R29, R27, and R24. Those are my really red colors that really give red its name. Really pure kind of reds there. So I'm just making sure that my highlight is going to be in the middle of his body here, because that's the point that's facing us the most. So that's where his highlight is going to be in this particular picture. When it comes to light sources on your Copic coloring, keep it simple. Don't really worry about whether or not it's coming from the left, from the right. Just pick where it's going to be naturally falling for you. If it happens to be that you have two different light sources in your picture, okay, who's going to notice? You might notice it, but the person that is getting the card, they're not going to notice. Now, if you want to do it that it's more, quote, professional looking, then keep your light source in the same area. But don't worry about it. Just make sure that you have a highlight in your area and there's some definition to your image. That's what you really want to focus on, and having fun doing it enjoy the process. So I'm just filling in the rest of this with my lightest color. On some colors, especially on reds, I will go back over the whole entire area with my lightest color, sometimes to blend it all back out and make it all nice and pretty. And now we have a little funny. When I first looked at this, it looks like that Santa took his pants off and is relaxing on him. But I did not color him that way. I colored him like he's still got his pants on, but it does look like that he took his pants off and just has his coat on and is chilling on his bag. That's how it kind of looks, but it's not. He still has his britches on. And I think when I was coloring this, I literally stopped and just busted out laughing when I was coloring it, and laughed for a good 10 minutes because I needed that laugh. Because I was like, Santa ain't got no pants on, because that's what it looked like. But anyway, I'm doing the same thing here. I actually colored his pants just slightly darker because they're a little bit further away from us. So I put a little bit more dark in them and had a smaller, lighter area in his pants. But I kept the same exact red colors and a little bit less lighter area in his pants than the rest of like his jacket and that kind of thing. And as I move, because I'm zoomed in so far, my camera does go in and out of focus a little bit here, and I apologize for that, but it does go into focus as my hand goes back into camera. And I missed the elbow in his jacket, but don't worry, I go back and catch that in a few minutes here. I caught it when I paused for a few minutes and got something to drink, and I saw it and I colored it off camera really quick. For his boots, I'm keeping those traditional black, and I'm just putting 100, the black 100 color in the creases and in the shadows, and then I'm going to use C9 and C7 to fill in the rest of his boots, because black doesn't have, it's not a really, black has so many different shades in it. It's actually, you see the shine of the color and that kind of thing. When you look at a pair of black boots, you have the shine of the color. So that's what I'm trying to represent here in these boots, is you have the shine of the tips of them. So I colored the very top of those with a C7, excuse me, a C7 there. And I color the soles with the 100 color all the way around. And I'm going to do the same for his belt. I'm adding a little bit more of the 100 color in some areas just to give the tops of the boots where they're folded over a little bit of definition, and then go back and color in with my C9 and C7. These are the cool colors. You'll see that I actually use the warm colors on the fluff of his hat and on the cuffs and of his jacket here in just a moment. And I'm going to do a little bit of stippling technique, which is just the dotted technique, to give it the cuffs and the hat brim, the fluff on his hat, a little bit of texture there. It just gives a little bit of different look. Instead of doing flicks or doing swirls, you can also do commas instead to give some texture to it. But I'm going to do a stippling technique that's just little dots. For his belt, I'm going to fill in with some 100 in those darkest areas and a little bit up just to give some definition to his belt right there, and then C9 and C7 as well. And fill that little area in between there and come up from that, and then that lightest area with a C7. And that's going to be his belt. You see I left that line around the bottom edge of his jacket. I'm going to take a gold pen and fill that in at the end, as well as the tie on the bag. I'm going to fill that in with a gold Pentel pen, so it actually will have some shine and actually look like a gold pen there. His mittens are traditionally black in most instances, so I'm going to color those in as well. And I just put the 100 color in those darkest areas and then come out from there. And then I noticed that I had left his little ear out when I colored his face. So I caught that real quick and filled in his ear real quick. And then we're going to color his mustache and his eyebrow and his beard. And I'm going to use the cool gray colors to finish coloring in his facial hair and his beard. And this is going to look really dark until it's all completed. And then it looks like it's gray. As it's all completed, because remember I said at the beginning of the video, the more color that you add, the lighter that dark area is going to look. So especially that I'm putting this on a black background, the pattern paper that I end up using is a black with red and green holly branches on it. It's a Christmas paper, and that really makes all of the lighter areas that are supposed to be white with some shadow in them look really, really light. Also, when you're coloring, don't be afraid to turn your paper. I also flicked in this color a little bit with some tiny little flicks and just following the pattern that's already there, added in the dark colors and extended some of those lines up a little bit. I didn't do a whole lot of much more detail or shadow in here, just added some little areas here and there, and turned my paper so that my wrist would be in that same direction as I was doing those. And then I'm just going to go back over this. I did C9, C7, and C5, and then colored everything over with a C3, I think, to fill all of this in. Just completing all of his beard here and soften all those lines out. When I'm doing hair for like a beard or something, I like to leave a lot of the texture in because beards tend to be a little bit more texture than actual hair on your head. And now we're going to move on to doing the cuffs, and I'm just doing dots. Just do dots. I started with my darkest color, and then I'm going to move on to my lightest colors. And these are the warm colors. So I started with a W7, I believe, and then moved on to a W5. I usually skip one when I'm doing my cools and warms. I do every other one. And this is just dots. You don't actually color anything in solid. It's just dots. And it gives some texture. And when it's done, it all melds together and it looks so amazing. I love this technique. Because when you get to the lightest color, you're coloring in with dots in all of the empty areas, but at the same time it's going to soften the edges on all of the colors, and all of them are going to blend together. See, I'm just doing dots everywhere around the edges and in all of the empty areas. I'm not actually coloring technically over top of anything. I'm just getting over all of those empty areas. And as it dries, it all softens out. And it is so awesome. I'm not going to do that technique on the brim of his hat. I'm going to do more of a regular line technique with some flicks, because that's how the hat is drawn. But the cuffs of the hat and the cuffs of his jacket and the poof on his hat were drawn more like they were cottony textured. So that's the reason that I chose to do two different techniques there, but they still blend together very well because I'm using the same colors, and I'm using a very similar technique on his hat that I did on the beard, drawing in those lines, and then I'm going over them with my lightest colors over those same lines multiple times, just extending out those lines a little bit here and there, and then I will go over it with my lightest color to soften all of it out. And if you wanted to, you could definitely do this with the dot technique over top of it. However, with the lines already drawn, I wanted to do just a regular coloring technique on that. For the green of the bag, I'm actually going to start with 100, the black marker. And that is so that I get a really dark green in here, and I'm just extending out some of the darker areas. If you notice, his head is kind of dented down into the bag, and his behind and his legs are dented down into the bag, but where his body and his arm are laying are more on top, so I did not extend those into with a black marker. I did do the bottom side of the bag, all of the lines that are in shadow, and behind the calendar page here, and on the inside of the where the bag is tied. I did do a lot of black down there as well to give it a little bit more definition, and along the back side of this bottom here, because that's going to be bent over a little bit more, so it's going to be a little bit darker right there on this back side and on the inside of where it's all folded up there. This blends out really well with a G29, and that's where my darkest green is going to be, is a G29. And then where that wrap is on the bag itself is where I actually use gold on it, so that it looks like it's a gold cord wrapping that around. And I'm just going to fill some of this in with my black marker, and then I will start on my green. For the green, I kind of color it, it's very similar to how I color my red, and I'm using G29, G19, and G17 and G14, I believe, to color this in. So now I'm just going to extend that black line out there, and this is where I actually add the green under him and all the way around, and I'm just doing basically little lines, teeny tiny little short lines of color here all the way around him. Extend some of that out a little bit because he's going to have that shadow under his head, and then I'm going to come down the bag a little bit more and give the bag down here a little bit of shape, because it's going to be bowled over, it's going to be a little bit more rounded down here. And I take that dark line all the way around the edge of the bag, because the edge of the bag is going to have more shadow on it than the center of the bag. That center of the bag is going to be where our highlight is going to be, because it's a round full bag. So the bottom side of it and the top side of it are going to have that more shadowy look to it. And I'm just extending that line out a little bit so I can get some of those flicks in there. And I usually will, on the outside edge for my darkest colors, I will do a hard line and then flick out from it. It's just easier to color that way. Also, remember, when you're learning to color Copic color, there's no real right or wrong way to do it. However you figure out to work the best for you is how it works best for you. And as long as you like the look of it, that's truly all that matters. That right there, and you enjoy the process. You enjoy setting down coloring. Don't worry about whether or not you're doing it the quote correct way. Don't worry about that. Just worry about whether or not you are enjoying the process. That's all that truly matters. And I can sit here and tell you all day long the colors that I'm using. You're going to have a different result just because you're going to put a different amount of ink on the paper, and you're going to color a different area of the amount of color on the paper as well. So it's always going to look a little bit different. Even if I color the same image 2 or 3 times, they're going to look very similar to each other, but they're never going to be exactly the same. And that's just the nature of creating something handmade. So always keep that in mind, that you can create something that's absolutely gorgeous. You could take the same image and use the same exact markers, but it's not going to look exactly like mine, and that's perfectly fine. That is 100% acceptable, and it shouldn't look exactly like mine. It should look like what you created and how you wanted it to look. And that's really, really important when you are Copic coloring. The other thing that I want you to keep in mind when you are learning to Copic color is don't compare your beginning to somebody else's middle. Don't compare your brand new start to I'm just now learning to Copic color to somebody's I've been Copic coloring for 10 or 15 years. Don't do that. Look at your I did this last week and I've been practicing, and this is where I am this next week. That's where your comparison, if you're really wanting to learn how to Copic color or color with any alcohol markers, that's where your comparison needs to be, is with where you started and where you are now. That's it. Nobody else's. Is it good to look at other people's coloring to learn new techniques? Absolutely it is. That's absolutely fine. But don't compare your work to where somebody else is, because your journey is way different. Just always remember that and keep that in mind. Your work is always beautiful no matter what. I hope that you give Copic coloring a shot for a Christmas card or two. It is a little time consuming, and if you're sending out a bunch of Christmas cards, I definitely understand why you wouldn't want to sit down for, you know, hours on end, unless you started now and started making your Christmas cards, which is why we're doing Christmas in July. Start making those Christmas cards now, and you can have a bunch of beautifully Copic colored Christmas cards by the end of the year for everybody. That's a good goal to have. Everybody gets a Copic colored Christmas card this year. That would be awesome. That would be awesome. For the rest of this card, I'm just going to do some simple coloring and filling in, basically. For the paper, I'm actually going to do E40 and E41 just to give it a little bit of paper look to it. And I'm using E27 and E23 for the board, just to make it look like it's a little wooden board up there. And I'm going to fill this in with R29 and add a little bit of R89 to the outside edge of my berries there. Give them a little bit of shadow. Nothing big, nothing. So Lucy's over here playing with the card at the moment. She's decided that she's going to sit in the window, and she really wants to sit on the card. She tries to help me. I don't know if y'all saw the video the other day where she decided that she was going to try to help me. I was in the middle of making that card, man, and she just decided she was going to play with my glue cap, and I couldn't get her off the table, and I couldn't stop videoing because I was in the middle of it. I could not get her off the table. I just had to let her play with it and go with it. She wanted to visit that day. Bless her little heart. She enjoys helping Mom on the craft table. So just fill the rest of this in, and then, like I said, I'm going to use my Silhouette Cameo and a pick scan mat to cut this out. I initially had done this on where I could just put it on my mat and send it through and cut it out. However, unfortunately, I had closed the file and I didn't save it. Whoops. So I couldn't actually do that, so I ended up having to just trim this out and put it on my pick scan mat, which was absolutely fine. And the cards are at the finished card is at the end of this, so you can see that. You can also head over to the blog and see those pictures as well. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope y'all have a great day. Come back and see me tomorrow.